Hello everyone, my name is Poppily Jennings. I'm an artist based here in the UK and you are listening to my brand new podcast, Into the Art World. So let's get started by, first of all, introducing you to this podcast and telling you what it's going to be about, but also introducing you to me and giving you a little bit more information on the host of this weird art world intrigued podcast. So the idea basically came about very recently. I've been submitting more art to exhibitions and to different prizes and getting involved with a lot more community work. I've worked in the arts sector for several years now, probably about 4 or 5 years, after studying English literature, having a stint professionally in publishing and deciding that career path was not for me. And yeah, but I want to specify as well, like when I say I've worked in the arts sector, it's very much from a public and community focused avenue. So I think that when you consider like the art world, it's very similar to the publishing world. Like it is a sphere within itself. And I think until you're directly within it, you can kind of like imagine how you're positioned around it, and like you do wonder, like obviously working in the arts, you do think of yourself as working within that sphere, within the art world, but it's really not the case. And I want to explain what that means. And I think that it's very interesting because the arts are in everything, and when you work for non-profits like I have and community focused projects, part of what makes it so frustrating as an industry is that it's funded by different project grants and government money, and you work with a lot of schools and community venues and groups supporting minorities, but also just introducing all types of people to that area of work and like being able to be more creative. So working within the arts is one thing, and I have, I guess, come to realize very recently that that is a completely separate thing to the art world, the elusive art world, this idea. I think it's quite funny actually, because even though I am 28 years old, I was just on the cusp of growing up with computers, so we didn't just automatically always have a computer in the house. I did not have a clue what Wi-Fi was. I genuinely believe that the only thing that we could do on our family computer when we had one was play Minesweeper, and Solitaire. That is all I had for computers for a really long time. But now we have this entire digital world, and I, know a lot more about it than my mum does, but I still don't fully understand how it works, what it does, but we see the benefits from it. I understand more about the digital world than I do about the art world, and I am an artist. And I really started to explore the idea of what the art world is through like reigniting my passion for podcasts. I started listening to podcasts again very recently. I started watching different artists talk about their experiences and their careers. And also through the media, I think by chance, have come across stories involving artists and galleries and museums and kind of gone, oh, okay, so this is a totally separate world. Like this is something that we are not just automatically a part of if we have an artistic job, which is really interesting. But I guess it makes sense in the same way that, before I went into publishing, you had like an idea of what that was career-wise and like an idea of what it entailed, but it is very much an exclusive closed off world, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. And that will be the same for every industry, and I think that you don't realize how separate you are from it, even if you feel like you are in some way involved in that space. So yeah, I decided to try and delve a little bit deeper into that. I have been creating and selling art for a number of years, but never kind of in the sphere of museums and galleries. That's not a space that I had really felt ready to delve into until very recently. And my first painting is going to be in a gallery that is not connected to my community. I've done a lot of community group shows, and I recently had a solo exhibition in Leeds, but it was at a community arts venue. So my first piece submitted and accepted to a gallery is a really exciting time for me, but also has kind of ignited this desire to find out more about this world and the different levels of it that exist, the hierarchies, the different platforms, the conversations, the elitism. I just find it absolutely fascinating, and I don't think it was something that I ever really thought about before now, but I'm really excited to have this journey, to like specifically pursue a journey into finding an access point, a doorway, some kind of open window into the art world. Because currently I'm experiencing it third hand through other people that write about it and post about it in various Substack posts or on podcasts. And recently, to name one specifically, I've been listening to Jerry Gagosian's Art Smack, which I think is amazing. I love listening to her talk and to the other people that she does it with talk. I think it's amazing. And it's really interesting for me because that is a person who is within the art world, who may not, by her own admission, be fully acknowledged as an artist within that sphere, but is still in it. She's there. She's had a gallery. She's explored and worked with lots of different venues and galleries and artists. And I just find it so interesting hearing a perspective from someone that has taught me, oh, okay, I'm not in the art world. I have an art job within the art sector, and that is not connected, which is really interesting. So that is kind of where this podcast begins. It begins with my research, my seeking out of the art world and a door to it, and learning from other people how they interact with it. And that's kind of what I'll be looking at when I'm talking to you about it. So I guess what is the art world is a really important question to start with. And I know I've touched a little bit on my understanding of it or lack thereof, and how, even if I've worked professionally, I still have very little understanding of what that means. And yeah, I think it's interesting from what I understand about it so far, largely from other people that I have listened to and watched very in the background, like not even through a window, through a letterbox, experiencing this world, but just through a screen, anonymously. Nobody knows I'm there. Nobody knows I'm watching. They put content out into the world, but they don't have a connection to those of us watching in a personal sense. So the art world, as far as I can, reasonably say, I am not in any way qualified, but I think that kind of makes it more fun because I have no attachment to it. I have no worries about anybody hearing what my opinions are, what my views are, and I get to just share them as a one person very distant from this world and my journey to understand what that world is. So the art world, I think, is an amalgamation of industries and individuals, specifically individuals who make up an elitist kind of bubble, shall we say. It's a big bubble. It's not a physical bubble, although I do find it quite interesting when I've read or heard people talk about where the physical foothold of the art world is. Because realistically, this is a sphere that does not touch ground. It's just in different avenues around us. It's in cities, it's on, you know, online in the digital sphere as well. But it's not something that you can very easily get access to. There is no real physical entry point to it for a lot of people, especially if you are anonymous or unknown to certain gatekeepers, shall we say. And I mean that as a position, not as an, you know, critical, although in some cases, yes, critical person who holds the keys. A lot of people hold keys to it. A lot of people can give access to it through different ways. But ultimately, the art world is a sphere built of a very few select people in the world. And then below, you know, you've got the galleries, you've got the gallery owners, you've got the collectors, you've got the sellers, all those people in positions to deal, collect, manage, display artwork. They are also within that sphere. And the sphere, I think, has certain levels to it that you can get in on, but ultimately it's the top galleries in the world, top agencies in the world that manage artists or their artwork. And it's not every gallery. Like, I know a couple of people who work at galleries, have, you know, in some way been in control of curating exhibitions and galleries, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that gallery has a foothold in that world. So I can't remember who it was. I'll try and remember for next time. But I was listening to someone who is an economist talk about how there are alpha, beta, gamma, etc. galleries. And, you know, I live in a city in the UK that is not, it's an incredibly creative city, but it is not really part of an industry. The biggest gallery in the city is owned by the council. It's the city-run gallery, as is the museum. And then there are privately owned galleries, and there are some very small community-run galleries. It's not a city that I would say has ever really been considered as having a foothold or a doorway into the art world. Not as far as I'm aware. I will remind everyone that this is literally like 2 weeks of me thinking, oh, I've learned this so far, why don't I just talk about it? But yeah, so I don't live in London anymore. And when I was there, I was purely in the capacity as a publishing person. So I didn't engage with any part of the art world beyond gallery, like going to galleries, going to see exhibitions, visiting the museum. And I think that's really important to note, because as much as galleries can provide a doorway, a gateway into this world, most of us won't even know where that gateway is, where that doorway is within that gallery. Like I said, it's not a physical doorway. I am going to metaphorically speak about a lot of these things. But every major gallery, especially in London, you know, it is our capital city. It's a huge placement within many different industries in the world, because of its status. But yeah, so every gallery, every, you know, we know the ones, we know the Tate, we know the British galleries and museums, we know all the national ones, we know the Portrait Gallery. All those galleries will have doorways into that world, and various different ways to experience it. But whether or not you are permitted access, or even know to ask for access, to gain that access, is very unlikely. And I think it's really interesting. I think, you know, most of us that on a recreational level visit galleries and go to museums and exhibitions are doing it purely as a consumer, not even as a customer. And I think it's important to stress the difference there within this sphere. You can be a consumer of art without being a customer. And even, buying a ticket to an exhibition, buying, postcards, prints, those things that are usually accessible to consumers, sorry, doesn't make you a customer, a collector of the art world. So I think that the difference there is that collectors are the ones that are going to galleries specifically to add to their collection. And I think that in the age that we have, if you're interested in art and you buy prints, which is so prolific now, buying art prints and collecting art prints as part of your recreational collecting, it's not the same thing. Art prints are copies, they're like hints of artwork, they are the average consumer's access to artwork. There's a lot of artwork that's available in the public domain, which just means that you can go online, you can download it, it's free to reproduce. But all of that just represents such an outward look at what the art world is. Having a picture or an awareness of Vincent van Gogh or Rembrandt or Monet, that doesn't give you that access point. It just means that you are aware that those people existed or still exist or, have created and are revered within the industry of the arts. What would make you a customer of the art world is your ability to collect art pieces. So the average person can have a print of Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers or Still Lives or Poet Series, but a collector, an actual customer within that sphere, will have one of the originals. They will have access to the originals. They will be at auctions, at art fairs, all these events that, again, have an access point into that world, but is not readily available to the average consumer. So that is my very basic understanding of the art world, how it exists, where it exists, which is obviously not in a physical space. Although I think I should touch on, people do consider there to be a physical, touch point of the art world, like a home of art. I think it's changed over the years, and you can see that, you can have an understanding of that based purely on influxes of art movements. And now most people, I think, would say that New York is the base or the home of the art world, but I don't think that that is something that's gone on for a very long time, nor do I think it's going to stay that way. I think that the art world moves, and something that I find really interesting, and this is purely an idea based on the fact that I love to read fantasy novels. I always imagine the art world as this kind of floating other dimensional city that moves around Earth, kind of like in Heather Fawcett's Emily Wilde novels, the idea of the different access points to other dimensions and other worlds being able to be found within our physical world, but that it can move, it can shift, it can float away and have a doorway present in another part of the world all of a sudden. And I think that you can see how those changes have happened through studying art history, through learning about the history of art in Paris, which obviously was I don't know, another foothold of the art world. There is a touch point there where it exists physically, but at the same time it's between planes of our understanding. It's a parallel world that sometimes comes into reality. For those of you that don't read fantasy novels, I'm very sorry for that description, but I hope that it makes some level of sense to you just by understanding, you know, the way that our universe works and our ideas of parallel universes. Another way I think that kind of potentially gives you access to the art world. I know for a lot of people this won't be true and won't even provide even like a toe's amount of space for you to get into the art world. But obviously having an art education is considered to be an essential to gain access to that world, because educational facilities and galleries and exhibition, you know, owners and things like that, they work very closely together. There's a level of discovery there, of introduction, of communication with very particular individuals that those outside of those educational facilities do not have access to really at all. There are a lot of art schools in the UK. Do I think that all of them have the same level of education or contribution or access? No, I don't. But that's the same with most university programs. They are not all perceived in the same way or accepted to be as equal as other ones. You know, we have Oxbridge here. It's always going to be thought of, or it always has been. I don't think it always will be thought of as the elite, because a lot of other universities are putting their foot down and being like, oh, actually, our education system is better. But, you know, in time, that perspective may change. But with the art world, there are always going to be different levels of opportunity and communication with professionals. But obviously, being a person that was outside of that realm and who does know people who have been within it, but not to a point of access, if that makes sense. It's a difficult world to get into, and I think that there is a reason why a creative or an artistic educational background is thought of as so important. But again, that comes from me, a person that hasn't ever been in an art position. I did A-level fine art, and that's where it ended for me. And that was just at one sixth form college, not one that had a particularly high level of connection to other big arts universities. So I don't know, like a lot of people that I know that went to art school would not consider it as giving them anything that they needed. You know, when I ask people like, oh, do you get taught to paint in certain styles, in with skill sets of certain artists, like how do you study the history of art, like how does that come into the degree? And a lot of people are just like, it's not about that. You're largely left to your own devices. You're given access to a studio. And I think that's where the art education system is massively failing, because it really does come down to, again, how elite you were before you went into education in the arts, and maintaining that elitism when you come out of it. A lot of people that go to art universities now do not come from privileged backgrounds, so then they have still no access point into the arts when they leave that educational facility. And I think it's really fascinating to consider how different people who have gone through art education come out of it at the end, and how different their experience is. Because ultimately, if you go to university, and regardless of what subject you study, if you don't build a level of connection or develop the skill sets that you need to get a job in that industry afterwards, it's not really a useful degree. And I think, you know, art degrees breed the most disconnected careers than other subjects. And by that, let me clarify that, because that was like a thought that just came straight out of my mouth. Most degrees have a decent rate of post-graduation careers. So like I went into publishing. A lot of friends that I studied English with became teachers, worked in different literary charities. So like there is a good rate of job conversion, I guess is a way to put it, in the literature sphere. There's more opportunities as well. Like remember, like not that many people go into publishing that study an English degree. I did, but I also did 3 internships and was already working for 2 years before it, before I even started university. So I had a level of skills that made me an attractive applicant for internships and eventually the job that I got. But a lot of people that go to art school, they don't have that, because I think I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe it's encouraged that people don't work while they're going through art school because they should be dedicating all of their time to their craft. And I think the problem with that is, you have no skills after you finish your degree to do anything other than continue your craft. And if there isn't a level of connection that comes out of that background, that educational experience, then you don't really have anything else to show for it. You don't have any understanding of business. You don't have any understanding of how to apply for jobs. You're coming into a job market 5 years after a lot of people from other degrees or like working class backgrounds, who are ultimately the majority of the workforce. So, I think it's interesting to consider the question of whether, like, is art education crucial to being a part of the art world? And I don't think it is. I think that you get an earlier understanding of what the art world is because you have people around you that have been a part of it or have been at least on the periphery of it and have that same understanding. But does it provide you with the skills to get into it? No, I don't think so. Most people are not going to gain representation from a major gallery straight out of studying. It just doesn't happen. There's not enough jobs or, money in the art world to go around. Like, I know it's quite an impressive financial industry, but ultimately it just doesn't work like that. And I think it is a fantasy, and it's spoken about as if it's not, which is what I find the most interesting about it. And again, I know that I said, but it's my connection. The publishing world is spoken about in exactly the same way. It's given to very young people as a fantasy. It's described of its like magic, its appeal, its excitement. But ultimately, once you get inside it and you realise, oh, okay, I was sold a dream and this is what I get. It's not the same as what people expect from it, and I think that's quite sad, but I do think it's more detrimental in the art world because of the lack of skills and training that people get. So another thing about the art world that I think I have touched on a little bit already, that I think is really interesting as an idea, as a concept, and as a business, is art collection. I've always wanted to buy original artwork and be in the position to be able to afford to do that comfortably and not feel as though the money that I spent should have been going to something else. Unfortunately, I have not hit a point in my life where that is a possibility for me, but I love to read about and hear about other people's collecting habits and how that works for different people. I just think it's really interesting. I know that at the grander side of the scale, at the larger, most expensive kind of £1,000,000 level of art sales, it's a business. Like it's a level of investment there. I understand that, but I just don't find it as interesting as when people buy art based on what they like. This is another thing that I've seen Jerry Gagosian talk about, so I will touch on that because that is where my like more business sided education comes from in this particular topic. So in one of her podcast episodes, Art Smack, she is discussing with others how collecting is inaccessible and what it means to different people. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about it, and to consider how money and the value of an art piece is completely immeasurable. I just find really interesting. I think it's true though as well, because from the work sphere that I have been in and the experiences that I have had, something that we all talk about is recognizing the worth of the artist and making sure that you factor in all of your costs first before looking at profit for the artwork. And when you price your artwork in the experience that I've had, something that we always talk about is how important it is to pay yourself an hourly wage and a decent living hourly wage as well. Not minimum wage. This is not a minimum wage job. It has a level of skill to it that you've trained and you've put lots and lots of time into creating. So it should always be a living wage number. So you calculate how many hours you've spent on that piece. So that's payment for your time. And then you add the material costs. So like the canvas, the paints, you work out the average cost of all that and how much went into that specific piece. And then you look at the skill level that you've produced, and you have to be honest with yourself as well. Like when you are very young in your journey, not young age-wise, but just new to what you're doing, you have to recognise where you are in that journey and ascribe the value to it very, very honestly. I think it's a hard thing to do because once you think about the time you spent on it and how much it costs you to make, you feel like that should always be something that's acknowledged. But the time you spend on something doesn't always reflect the value of the work that you've created, and that's absolutely fine. Just because the skill doesn't meet in this particular piece doesn't mean that it's not going to progress you to like finding the cost of that artwork. But it's interesting because obviously at a certain point in the art world, at a certain step up the ladder, it stops being about the time spent on the art or the cost of the materials, the cost of the actual artwork, and the included profit margin that you put into it, like whatever percentage that is. None of that is factored into how much a piece of art costs, and it starts to become purely about who the artist is, but also who the representative is. So like the gallery or the agency that is selling that piece of art, they become what the consumer, the customer, is paying for. So the skill level of a painting by someone really famous could be exactly the same as someone who is not famous at all. And despite them being two gorgeous pieces of art, absolutely stunning, they're amazing, that non-famous artist is not going to make the same amount or anywhere close to that famous artist or famous gallery. And I just find that so interesting because obviously, like I said, we are taught or like talked through how to price artwork in the art sector based on cost, time, and a profit margin and a commission. So in every price of my artwork, for example, I keep a log of my hours. I keep a log of material costs, and I make sure to include a profit margin for myself based on what I've put into it. and an average commission rate that I know to expect from galleries that my art will appear in. And like if they sell, that is the commission that they'll take. And then on top of that, you have to add the VAT, because I'm not sure if it's the same everywhere in the world, but obviously in the UK, VAT is an automatic payment, so it's always added into the price. So you add that into the price as well. You pay the VAT off, and then what's left is the profit. So it's interesting, obviously, to see how certain artworks are worth such a high number purely based on the gallery or the artist's name, because it could be something absolutely terrible and it still gets collected, it still gets purchased, regardless of what it looks like, because of who or what it represents. But even if I don't plan to own an original Anna Weyant painting, who is one of the artists that I absolutely adore at the minute, and actually is one of the reasons, one of the people, I should say, that led me into my journey into the art world. And I'll explain why before I go. Because obviously Anna Weyant was in the media a few years ago, for a number of years actually. It never really kind of went away, because of her past relationship with Larry Gagosian. And the introduction that I had to that was basically a year and a half ago. An article came up on Twitter. It was something really, like, obviously misogynistic, like female artist, 26, selling art for millions due to relationship with 86-year-old art gallery owner or whatever it was. I didn't know who Larry Gagosian was. I knew what Gagosian was because obviously it's one of the biggest galleries in the world. So that was like as much as I knew. And I remember seeing this article and being like, oh great, okay, this is ridiculous. Let's see what this artwork is like. It must be absolutely terrible. But it's some of the most amazing artwork that I've seen in a long time. Obviously my introduction to her artwork was through the digital realm, but it just made me, I just absolutely loved it. I spent like a couple of months on and off like reading these articles that came up, because obviously the algorithm got hold of the fact that I liked Anna Weyant and liked looking at her work and reading about her. So I got a lot of these articles coming up, and eventually last year saw that she had a show coming up in London. So I went down to see that show and I absolutely loved it. Like, my passion for it only increased when I saw the work in person, which is always something that you want to look out for with art, because if you have the same or a much stronger reaction to artwork in person than you do viewing it online, it holds a certain place in your heart, and I think it makes it more important to you. And I think a lot of people should acknowledge that reaction that they have to art more often. But yeah, so I was reading about it, and then the articles, because they were so focused on how it disrupted the art world, that kind of terminology just stuck in my head. I wanted to know why it was so important to the media that this elusive art world was up in the air about Anna Weyant and Larry Gagosian, and what did it mean, and look at how crazy her sales have gone, and all this really, over such a short amount of time, this really interesting set of events just like captured me, and it fascinated me, and I was like, okay, I need to understand more about this. And that's what led me to reading and learning more about what the art world is. And again, this is all just very basic stuff. I am very much still on the outside. I feel like I'm at the bottom of someone's driveway trying to peek through a window and I can see absolutely nothing. That is how I feel about the art world. And that is what I'm hoping to change, or at least pursue some level of higher knowledge, more interesting knowledge about the art world and what that is. So, what is my plan? How am I going to infiltrate the art world? Well, first of all, I am gonna do more art because, you know, I am an artist and that should be my main focus for getting into that sphere, obviously. So I'm gonna be an artist, I'm gonna continue to be an artist, and I'm gonna pursue more relationships with galleries and exhibitors, exhibition curators, sorry, but also exhibitors. It's nice to know your fellow exhibitors. And I'm gonna just see how building relationships with these people within these positions goes, and what that can offer me professionally, but also on a very like hobby based way, because my interest in the art world and how I follow that will absolutely be in that regard. So yes, plan one, just be an artist, just continue to be myself. Number two is I am going to London Art Fair, which is in a couple of weeks. I'm excited for it. I'm going for 3 of the days. I'm going to go Wednesday to Friday. I'm not staying for the weekend because I wanted to go to most of the talks, and the ones that I wanted to go to fell on those days. So I'm really excited about that. And a lot of the talks are obviously catered to the art world, to collectors, to art journalists and curators and people within the sphere in regard to writing about it and acknowledging it and understanding what it all means. So that should be really interesting. I'm excited for the talks. And I'm just going to continue to follow the trails, and I'm going to discuss here with you what I find, what I understand, and I guess what is going on, and how is the art world changing, if I can even understand what it is in the first place. And I think that something that I'm definitely going to acknowledge straight away is that the art world is not a physical location. It doesn't exist in that way. It's not tangible, and yet it is there and can be accessed. So it offers a very interesting journey to getting inside. And I will let you know if I find an open window and what I find on the other side of it. Thank you for listening or watching along as I ramble through my intentions and understanding of the art world. If you want to hear more, I will be recording every week. And yeah, thank you for sticking around for Into the Art World, and I will speak to you next time. Bye.